How the coronavirus outbreak is impacting the 2020 U.S. presidential race. We have Richard Goodstein with us. He's been advising most Democratic presidential campaigns since 1984, including former President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. Richard, really good to have you with us. First of all, we're in an unprecedented situation, to say the very least. And we have seen how this outbreak here in the United States has had a big impact on everything from debates being held without an audience, primaries being pushed back and canceled. How is this affecting the Democratic presidential nomination?
Democrats are actually quite fortunate that Joe Biden has done so well to, for all practical purposes, put his capturing the nomination behind him. The only person who seems not to recognize that is Bernie Sanders. As you just mentioned, he's going to compete in the New York primary, assuming it's held on time. One questions that now. Because if in fact this were still a very competitive race, given what's happening with coronavirus, it would be a mess. Fortunately, because Biden really has this locked up, he can think ahead, prepare for the general election campaign, speak to the country as if he is the Democratic nominee already. Otherwise, it would be a catastrophe.
If you're advising Joe Biden in all of this, how do you navigate a situation where the U.S. president is receiving huge amounts of airtime as he declares himself a wartime president? He's called this the war on the invisible virus, and has essentially boosted his profile and seen a spike in his approval ratings. If you're Joe Biden, how do you continue to get your message out there without trying to seem like you're vying for too much attention in a time of crisis?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think the fact, though, is that Biden is doing what he can to say, Donald Trump takes an American first, which means America only approach to a lot of issues, dealing with coronavirus being one of them. Joe Biden would take a more multilateral approach to go after this in ways that bring other countries together, traditional allies of the United States, to fight this. And the good news for Joe Biden is, even though you're right, Trump has seen his popularity tick up a little bit. There is some sense that he's handling the crisis reasonably well. If you look at all of the polls nationally and state by state that have come out just within even the past few days, Biden still maintains a 5-6 point lead against Trump in the national polls. And in a lot of the key swing states, he is ahead. So it seems, I think the public's able to differentiate between, okay, Donald Trump's doing okay with regard to the crisis, but we still don't think he's doing a particularly good job as president generally. We certainly think the economy is going to take a big hit, and we'd rather see Joe Biden in the White House.
I feel like that would be a difficult argument to make, though, at this point, when you have a lot of the supplies needed to combat this outbreak here in the United States being made overseas. You have President Trump making the argument that the United States needs to make sure it's an independent nation in every sense, including manufacturing its own medical supplies, its own medicine. So that's a tough argument to take there into the 2020 race. But I want to just touch on one other factor here really quick, which is Andrew Cuomo, the New York governor, has really managed to elevate his profile in all of this, in essentially being on the front lines of the outbreak in New York here in the United States. Where do you see his presidential prospects in all of this?
Right. Just if I can, a point on your observation. If the United States cuts itself off from the world, we won't get in the masks and the pharmaceutical manufacturing that we now so desperately depend on. As much as we might want to start up manufacturing in the U.S., we can't do that in a timely enough way to deal with the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans who are going to need what we need to get from abroad. That's the problem with an America Go It Alone approach. Andrew Cuomo has done a great job of showing real leadership. I mean, I think there's a huge distinction with he is saying, if you have a problem, blame me. Whereas Donald Trump has said, if there's a problem, I don't know what you're talking about. So therefore, I do think people are looking at Andrew Cuomo as somebody who is of real presidential caliber. For purposes of 2020, though, that ship has sailed. He just chose not to get into the campaign. A couple of years ago, it looked like he might. He didn't. And right now, Joe Biden's going to be the nominee. 2024, though, I think people will remember the kind of leadership that Andrew Cuomo displayed. And he will certainly be somebody, even if Joe Biden wins, who we talked about as a possible Democratic nominee 4 years from now.
All right. Richard Goodstein, we really appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.